Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Bostwick. Thanks for tuning in to Nikki Bostwick Unfiltered. I'm so excited to have Lindsey Meehleis here today with us. She has been a certified professional and licensed midwife for 20 years, and she practices what she calls womb to tomb midwifery, and we are so excited to have her on. I've known Lindsey for years, and I'm going to actually share my story meeting her on this podcast, which Lindsey doesn't even remember. So it'll be fun, and we're going to ask.
Refresh my memory.
Yes, exactly. So anyways, yeah, thanks for joining us. I know you have such a busy schedule, and it's so funny. Before, when I was like looking up and getting ready to find what midwife I wanted, or just looking into a home birth with my first, which was, he was born in 2018. So I got pregnant with him in 2017. And I had you like on my radar. I found you through Instagram, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's local to me, and I'm so excited. And I was nervous at the time, just like anyone else is with a home birth. Yeah. So I like found you. I found an OB. And then I found you, and I didn't know anything. I thought, oh, I can have an OB and a midwife, which now I know, like, any people say, like, any practicing midwife that says yes to like that sort of thing is, you know, not necessarily someone you want to work with. That's what I've heard. But
I mean, there's certain situations, like I work a lot with Dr. Stuart Fishbein,
exactly, yeah,
Dr. Victoria Flores, and they are complementing the home birth experience. But for us to have a obstetrician within a hospital-based system, and then a midwife that's a home birth midwife, like I have a backup that I use, but I do not require anybody to have that like continuity back and forth, because it's two different paradigms that you're living in. One's within that Western medical system, and then the midwifery model of care is completely different. And so you're constantly finding yourself between this push and this tug of like what you want to actually believe in and what the system's telling you, and you're like back and forth, and it's just not, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And so anyways, we came and we met with you, and at the time I already had Dr. Illick. And my husband liked him, and so, you know, he wasn't ready for a home birth, and we met, and then but at the end of the day, he was like, it's up to you. But I came to your office, and it was so beautiful and like fun, and like you had kids' toys, and you know, you have everything there for a mom.
Whole, like Waldorf inspired playroom there. Yeah, it's very soft. It feels like home in our office.
It does. It was literally just like home.
And you went to our old office too. Our new office is even more.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to come. And my sister, actually, she gave birth at Irvine Hogue. And I think they recommended the chiropractor that's in your office for her. So funny. But anyways, so we went, and you were like, oh, Dr. Illick is good, but like, you know, like this is how I practice, whatever. It's up to you guys. And then I was like, okay, well, I don't know why, but the 5 freeway makes me nervous, and I would have to take the 5 freeway to see you. And I never understood why. And I wasn't, at the time I was in the type of therapy, I understood generational trauma, but it was more of like a traditional psychiatrist that was working with me and not, do you know Luca Barbara Johnson? Who I started working with. And she started working with later on, like after I had, right around the time I became pregnant with my daughter. So years later, like 3 years after I had my son, she started working with me, and then she uncovered this whole thing with my mom. She's working with me, my sister, and my mom. So we've had a crazy amount of healing from that. And that my mom almost died, like literally right around the exit to go to your office.
Of course you had that. Imprint within your system. And
I never spent time in that area, even though I grew up here, by myself driving. Like my family did, and we always drove around and stuff, but I never drove there by myself, which is so weird. And I never put any of this together. And until literally a few months ago, when my mom started doing psilocybin journeys, and then like figured out all of this stuff. And anyways, what's so crazy is, I do want to say this, that I think I was meant to have a hospital birth, even though I wish my experience was so different. But I ended up like saying no to everything except for the newborn screening test, which like you can opt out of. And I'm like the type that's like, do not come near me. And somehow like they did it. And we found out my son has a genetic condition called MCAD, very rare.
Yeah.
And like he needed to eat every 90 minutes, and like those sorts of things you can still do with a home birth, and I did with my daughter. But I feel like for me, I'm the type of person, like maybe that was all meant to happen.
Well, it was, because it happened.
I know.
And so it was
crazy.
Part of your sacred contract, which is something that's so beautiful. And that's exactly what you needed to have in this lifetime. And especially for the health of your son, not that we don't do those same tests.
Exactly,
but for whatever reason.
Yeah.
That was the lesson that you needed within the hospital, which is beautiful that you recognize that.
But because of my experience with like them giving me Cytotec to induce me multiple times, and then getting CPS called on me after he was born because of his condition, that's when I really dove headfirst into this work too, like just learning more about it and birth. And it's so beautiful. And I mean, Cassie, Gina, like diabetic, my friend who's
type
been
1 diabetic.
She's been my friend
with me.
2 home births with you, and Tammy, like all of my friends have used you. So it's just been like we've had this story but never really been able to sit down and connect, and so I'm excited. Anyways, long intro, but I want to learn like more about your story and how you ended up finding yourself in this work, and because you're just such an advocate for home births. Like I would have never, I don't know, I would have thought about it obviously, like, oh, it's so great, but I feel like you make it so accessible for people and for women to know I can do this, and this is something that's part of me and something that my body knows what to do. I mean, I went on to have a home birth, but I just want to hear about like your experience. Obviously it probably has to do with your birth too.
It does. So I had a hospital birth with my first down here in Laguna Beach, and I was super young when I had her. I was actually 21 when I had her.
Wow.
It wasn't a planned part of my life, but it was the most divine intervention that had ever happened. And I was already working in the hospital at that point. So I was down working at South Coast in Laguna, and I just did what everybody did at that point. I found the best doctor that everybody used and basically went through the system. And I had certain points throughout that experience where I kind of questioned, like, well, that's weird. Like, shouldn't my body know how to do that? But I was young and naive. And I took childbirth classes, and I, at that point, was like, oh my gosh, this is so empowering. And I feel like this would be such a, good way to like experience birth and have a natural birth. And then I was given Cytotec as well.
No way.
Multiple times. And Cytotec, for those that don't know, is a drug that's used. It's used off-label. It's a black label drug that's used in childbirth, and it's used to induce labor. They commonly use it very often for abortions as well. So they're little tiny pills that are placed next to the cervix. Sometimes you take them orally. And I mean, there's so many side effects that are never talked about.
What are they? Because I don't know them.
The worst one is an amniotic embolism, which is basically maternal death. And there's tons of documented cases about it. Ina May Gaskin is a midwife that's from Tennessee. She runs, well, not anymore, she doesn't run it, but she started the farm in Tennessee. And she has made a quilt for maternal deaths in our country. And I saw this probably 15 years ago, and it would wrap around a football field. And so many of those deaths within that quilt were from the use of Cytotec being used off-label, and it's still used every single day. It's not like
that's insane.
Like people, when you opt for something else in the hospital, like, can we use something else besides Cytotec? They're like, why?
Well, what's so funny, or not funny, it's sad, is that like I did a lot of research, and no one ever brought up. Like I read so many books, no one ever mentioned Cytotec in them. It was pretty new. Like it's something that's like newer that we're using, and my doula had no idea about it, so she was like, I don't know anything about it, so it's up to you. And I felt like so on the spot, and it was weird that she hadn't come across it either. My
second cousin, 2016, I want to say, she induced for birth, and all of a sudden we got a phone call that she had passed away in labor, and I was like, find out if she had cytotech, and sure enough she did, and she passed away from an amniotic embolism. So I mean, it's something that like it happens. Like someone within my family it happened to. It is rare. It's, I don't want everybody like freaking out like, oh my God, but
you need to know this
side effect. There is the potential for the risk of that, and so if we aren't being given actual risks, then we're not being given proper informed consent, which is one of the most important things that I always talk about. Like, we need to have proper informed consent with everything that we do, not just involving birth.
Yeah.
Everything that we do.
Everything.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And that's the other thing is like, so I knew about Pitocin and everything else, or the other ways to induce someone, but I didn't know about cytotech. So then like, they were like, well, if you don't want Pitocin, there's this other thing, and it's not, you can still have a natural, because I was like, I don't want an epidural. And I know if I get Pitocin, I'm more likely to have an epidural. So they're like, oh, well, this other thing. And anyways, I couldn't say the word cytotech until my son was 2.5 years old. I couldn't speak about it. And I did the birth trauma work with Luca, and I was like, cytotech. Like, I can say it. It's so crazy how, we just store so much in our bodies, and we really need to process and
we need to have proper avenues for people to process our traumas, because it's something that's such an important thing. I mean, there's a book that I love that's called The Body Keeps Score, and it's like our body remembers everything. If we look at how our nervous system works, you look at animals after a traumatic event, they sit and shake for 20 minutes. We usually recycle it, and so instead of sitting and shaking for 20 minutes, we store it in little places in our body, and it's like those traumas don't go away unless they're addressed. And so one thing that actually does happen after birth is it's very common for a woman to shake right before giving birth and right after. It's part of the hormones, but to me it's also releasing everything that's just happened within their bodies. And so that's something that I always encourage women, that like, I always place my hand on their chest or my hand on their feet and be like, you're safe, it's okay, don't try to fight it, just let your body process and move through this. And I don't find it to be ever a traumatic event for them once they feel that they're in a safe place to do so.
What about like emotional? I mean, I want to get into a million other things, but like for me, what I was so stuck on when I was trying to heal that part of like my birth was the emotional message I gave my son when I took an abortion pill. Even though obviously it's not what I was using it for, but
no, I mean, it's just to induce your cervix opening and your uterus contracting. So regardless if it's for that or for actually going into labor, I mean, there's a lot of imprints around that, like it today in modern culture. If we look, there's a study that was done a few years ago by the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology that says basically that every baby is healthy enough and should be induced by 39 weeks. We should never let a woman go past 39 weeks. It's part of the Arrive trial that was published. And what does that say to our bodies? Like, our bodies don't have an expiration date on them. And it's, if you look back to what I call great grandma wisdom, our grandmas would miss their periods, they would miss their moon time, they would look up at the sky and they would see what the moon was in, and they'd say, oh, I guess in 10 months from now, 10 moon cycles from now, I'll be having a baby. They weren't counting days, they weren't attached to it, and you look at it still today in modern culture, we're not doing that for our animals. We don't like go and schedule a C-section for a cow because they've gone 10 days later than the average is. It's just a bell curve. And so yes, while our due date lies at that bell curve of average of 40 weeks, the same amount of people that give birth at 38 weeks give birth at 42 weeks. And so we just need to remember that our bodies know what to do. And I'm a midwife that people come in and they're like, do you want me eating 6 dates a day? And do you want me to drink red raspberry leaf? And do you want me to do all these things? And I said, if you like the taste of it, sure. But 6 dates is a lot of sugar, first of all. And you need to be combining that with some sort of a fat if you're going to do that. And red raspberry leaf is great. It's a uterine tonic, but it's not going to induce your labor. And there's not one thing that I can tell you to take for me to say that that's going to make your body work. I inherently already trust that your body's going to do exactly what it's supposed to do and knows how to work. So all these pills are you actually taking trust away, or not just pills but dates and teas and everything are just taking trust away from the inherent fact that our bodies work. And so there is this kind of hidden message that we pass on to our children, that not only that did we not trust our own body's timing for that, but we didn't trust our baby's timing within that process.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, we look at our culture, we're like rushing around every 5 seconds, and nobody has the ability to sit down and just trust, and nobody has the ability to re-regulate ourselves with anybody. And I promise you that's, you know, stems from some of this. You know, you can't have a culture that has such a drastic difference of birth and, you know, expiring, and then have this culture where nobody knows how to just chill and have a conversation and look at someone in their eyes and slow our breath down on each other and just sit in space together. It's something that we really have to reteach ourselves to do.
I know, and it's so amazing. All these schools, these new like pods are coming up since COVID. There's so many things that have changed.
Yeah,
but so many that are crazy. But okay, so you took cytotech.
Yeah, so I took cytotech there. So I took cytotech, and it didn't work. So my body was like, hard no. I am a closed flower. You are not peeling the buds off of this rose. And they broke my water, and I literally felt my daughter come up and out of my pelvis at that point. And I felt like a physical shift in my body, and I was like, that's weird. Like, I've never felt her in that position before. And I had Pitocin for 18 hours and didn't dilate past 2 centimeters, and had the epidural. I mean, I had everything, internal monitoring, you name it. And, 11 o'clock rolls around at night, and my doctor comes in and says, well, we can turn everything off and start this again in the morning, or you can just have a C-section, because you're probably going to end up with a C-section anyways. And so I looked at my mom and my mother-in-law, who both had C-sections, and they're like, just do a C-section. Like, what's wrong with that? And so I had a C-section, and I felt everything during that. Like, my anesthesia did not work. Like, I was like telling them, they're like, do you feel where I'm touching right here? And I could tell them exactly where they were touching. So once she was born, they basically knocked me out, to which I hallucinated.
Wow.
And, felt like a out of body death experience that was happening, where I really had to make a decision to be here on this planet and to be the mother to my daughter. And, again, I was 21 at this time. So I really didn't have the adult skills to make decisions, to be like, no, like, this is what's happening in this moment, and this is what's happening in this moment. It was like, no, this is life or death. And so I, fought hard. I worked at that hospital, and I remembered the beeps of the machines, because I worked in the emergency room. So I would make a certain machine beep a certain way to know that I was still present in my body. And I came out of that surgery and put my daughter in my arms and basically never let her go for the next 2 years, and, totally embraced attachment parenting at its finest. She was on my hip at all times. And I really had this traumatic experience, which led me to always keep saying, like, there was this little voice in the back of my head that was like, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And so I dove headfirst into birth work when she turned 1.
Wow.
But I didn't know what that meant at that time. So I was like, I'm going to be a childbirth educator, and I'm going to go and teach classes and, teach women to not have the same experience that I had. And I started in a hospital setting. I worked at Irvine Regional Hospital when it was still called that. And I mean, man, oh man, I got in trouble every other week from OBs.
Really?
They would call me and they would say, like, you're teaching them too much. They're coming in with too many questions. This isn't how we practice medicine. We don't want them asking questions. And I didn't stop. I didn't care.
They would literally say those words.
Oh, they would literally say those words.
We don't want them asking questions.
Yeah, they didn't want. We were making them not compliant. And so, I would stand as my 23-year-old self in the auditorium in front of 300 people teaching breastfeeding classes.
Wow.
and telling them to not use pacifiers and formula. And that also rocked the world of the hospital setting. And so I was like, this is fine. And I was doing doula work. I was in the hospital doing doula work and experiencing the same stuff that I had experienced with my own birth. And I was like, this is not helping. I'm not helping the situation. I'm actually an accomplice to a crime at this point. Like, I'm sitting in a room watching obstetrical violence. These women are having poor outcomes and bad experiences. And I don't feel like I'm making a difference. Like, I know that they are grateful that I was there, and that definitely helped their experience, but I'm not making the difference that I want to see.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to become a lactation consultant. So I drove down to UCSD for over a year and a half, and I became an international board certified lactation consultant, which is just alphabet soup after my name, if you ask me. And I was like, no, this isn't it either, because I was still working in a hospital setting, and I still would have, these babies that would come into my clinic straight from the nursery or straight from moms having had C-sections. I would look at the board and I would count how many C-sections there were the night before. And I was like, this isn't it either. And so right around that time, one of my dear colleagues and mentors was like, I'm starting a midwifery school. I think you should come.
Oh my gosh.
And so I made the commitment. It was down in San Diego as well. And I drove down there. And
how old was your daughter?
My daughter at that point was 4.
That's a huge commitment.
And I got pregnant in the middle of it
on
purpose. I was like, they're getting too far apart in age. And so I finished midwifery school with a newborn. I brought him with me to class. And it was the first state accredited midwifery school in California. And it's closed. So it tells you the longevity of midwifery programs. They closed, I think, 2 years ago.
Wow.
And I dove headfirst. Like, there was no looking back. By the time I graduated, like, I had multiple people that were on my calendar, like, as I was taking the test up at the medical board in California, so it was like, there's no looking back. And I started my midwifery career. And so, I have been like totally heart-centered, heart-led without all of this with my practice. And I've seen so much shift and change. And it's still, I feel so grateful that I'm able to provide a sacred space for women to feel safe in. But it's wild.
So you were able to do that, like, right away. You started your own practice outside of the hospital setting?
Immediately.
Wow.
Immediately. And like I said, I was pregnant. I took my newborn to class. So flip side is that my son was born in the jacuzzi in our backyard under the stars. And I had, a completely opposite experience of what I had with my daughter. And that in itself was, life-changing. But my daughter's birth was the catalyst for all of it.
Yeah,
so like you said, you were supposed to give birth in the hospital.
Yeah.
I was for sure meant to have a C-section and have that happen, or I wouldn't be the person that I am today. So, back to sacred contracts, I totally believe that all of these things that happen to us are supposed to happen to us.
Yeah.
And we get to either lead the light from the experience or stay in the darkness and not process through the trauma.
Yeah. And you had your hospital birth, your home birth, you started your practice. When was that? What year?
That was 2012.
Wow.
Yeah, licensed 2012. Maybe.
And in California,
it was 2010.
And are they like trying? I heard that they're making it easier. Is that true, or is it?
The requirements have still stayed the same. So basically what happens is there's a it's called NARM, which is North America Registry of Midwives. And then there's another affiliated organization that's called MEAC, which is the Midwifery Educational Accreditation Council. And they both talk to each other and kind of make these guidelines. And every state's different. There's actually a lot of states where midwifery is still illegal.
Wow.
There's states where midwifery is illegal, so there's no licensure laws in place around it. And so it's kind of like the wild, wild west, and people just make it up. And then there's states like California and Washington, which are almost mirror to each other with our licensure and our restrictions. And so they look at those accreditation councils and they say, like, what is it that they need to fulfill in order to sit for our test at the medical board?
Oh, okay.
And so I wouldn't say that it's getting easier. It's pretty much the same, but I feel like midwifery school in general is kind of going down the tubes. Like,
that's so sad. We need it to stay.
Yeah.
Women, because it's not just the birth. It's so much more than that. It's how we learn to take care of our bodies. Midwives pass down so much more knowledge than just that part of your life.
And that's why I say womb to tomb, right?
Yeah.
So like from the time that we're growing a baby in our womb, but like then that baby also, like when they come back in for siblings and they like see what's normal for birth, and then they have the experience of experiencing midwifery care for their woman care, and knowing what their fertility is, and knowing how they can feel their own breasts and how they can measure their cervical fluid for fertility. Like there's so many other pieces to it that just completely get left out. And so what I've noticed within my practice is midwives are kind of like the original family physician, you know? Because even if it's like you wouldn't even believe the calls I get. Like, my dad has this and this and this, and what do you think that this is okay? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not an expert in like podiatry or something, you know. But the relationship that's established creates such a deep trust that that's who you look to. That is your medical connoisseur, if you will. And that's always how it's been. That's they were the family physicians, and the World Health Organization recognizes this. Prior to COVID, the World Health Organization said that the world was short 900,000 midwives. And so they actually recognize that midwives can provide, the adolescent to, menopause care, if you will.
Wow.
And so they know that if we train more midwives and these midwives went into the villages, that there would be so many better outcomes for overall health for our reproductive, childbearing women. And so it's something that it's out there. We know the data. We know that it improves outcomes, but it's something that, especially in the Western society, the United States specifically, it's very much still kind of taboo.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know the data on? Because in Europe, isn't it like 70-80% still use midwives?
Yeah, midwifery care is very well accepted over there. It never shifted.
Yeah.
So when Western medicine came to the United States, basically the Rockefeller Foundation said midwives are like totally not who we should be using. We should be using these male-trained obstetricians. And if you had money, if you were part of this upcoming class of society, you were using an OB, because if you were using a midwife, you were part of the lower class, and the midwives were dirty. And the Rockefellers at that time owned all the newspapers, and probably still do. And they would go on smear campaigns with midwives. So they would post pictures of, granny midwives from the South, these African-American ladies that came from Africa that had all of the knowledge
the wisdom,
of midwifery. And they would post pictures of them and basically say, like, don't use these dirty midwives.
My God.
And that's when birth got brought into the hospital. I mean, there's the grandfather of obstetricians as Joseph DeLee, Dr. Joseph DeLee. And I mean, he's like quoted so many places saying that, midwives are basically like relics of society. Like they're like the scum of the earth. And when you have figures like that, and then you have people that want to be part of this upcoming class and be part of this new technology, then you kind of see these, midwifery figures left in the dark. And so midwifery didn't necessarily die, but there definitely was a very dark period.
Yeah.
In the early 1900s, it was 100% of babies that were born at home. You reach 1950, it was like 5% were born at home.
That's insane.
In terms of civilization, that's a blip, and that's a really, really, really fast period of time
for it to switch.
And, even up recently in like 1979, it was only like 10% of women that were in medical school. So it was a male-driven industry for sure. And I'm sorry. I mean, I love some of my male OB friends, but it is not a place for that. They don't get their moon cycles. They don't understand the hormonal changes that happen every month. They don't know what happens with gestating life and this miracle inside of us and giving birth. And then all of a sudden breastfeeding and the hormonal changes that come with that, and the dynamics that change within the family unit. Like, that's just not, that they don't get to experience that.
No.
And so I think that really pulled us back away from trusting birth and trusting our bodies, and moved us into a very machine-driven way of looking at the body, if you will.
What are the stats now in the United States? Do you know how many people use midwives?
So it's pretty low still. So,
like 10%?
If you look at midwives in a clump as a whole, so midwives in the hospital, midwives in birth centers, and midwives with home births, it's probably about 10%. Home births are typically only about 2% of the births in the United States.
That's crazy.
And since 2020, it's jumped up 20%. So that doesn't mean it's 20% of births or home births. It means that within that small little statistic, it's gone up because nobody wanted to go to the hospital. Yeah. And so it's very low still. And so, what happened was 15 years ago, there was a movie I'm going to back up a little bit more. Before we had this resurgence of midwifery, it was in the 70s. 70s with Ina May Gaskin, this spiritual midwife. All of these hippies left Berkeley, California, and caravanned out to Tennessee to start a commune. And there was no training, and they were all having babies on this caravan out to Tennessee. And so these midwives had nothing more than a book that they learned their training. I don't want to call it obstetrical training, because it's not. It was midwifery training at that point, and they just delivered babies along the way on the side of the road in these caravan buses. So that was the resurgence, and it was still very low. And then 15 years ago, Ricky Lake and Abby Epstein created a documentary called The Business of Being Born. And I was, part of that. Like, that was, 15 years ago, I was very much involved in the birth world. And I was involved in it 5 years prior. So I saw this huge catalyst come up, where I call it the tsunami, that kind of shifted the paradigm within the birth world, because everybody was like buzzing about it. Ricky Lake was still kind of the talk of the town at that time. She had published this very, intimate documentary. And so she blasted it to the public, and it got a lot of feedback. It got a lot of press coverage. It got a lot of negative feedback as well. But women started waking up and realizing that they had choices. And so as that kind of catapulted this change, there was other documentaries that came up. There was a lot more people speaking out against what was happening in terms of the trauma that was being experienced. And what we were experiencing in the 2000s compared to what they were experiencing in the 1920s is not even comparable. I mean, in the 1920s, they were fully knocked out with scopolamine and tied to the beds and had their babies drug out by forceps. So
I was wondering how they got the babies out, because I think my husband's grandma had she was blocked out during her birth.
They drug them all out by forceps, which was the invention of the cord clamp at that time, right? If you have a mom that's passed out that can't hold her baby, the doctor's not going to sit and hold the baby. So they invented the cord clamp, because if they didn't have a clamp, they would cut the cord and the blood would go everywhere, because it's still pulsating all of the baby's blood that it needs in order to get their blood supply back after birth. But nope, now we have this little clamp that goes on so that it doesn't bleed anymore. So, once you start to kind of dig, you're like, oh my gosh.
They invented all these things. And the mortality, you have the stats for the mortality
and rates. I'm going to read it because they're new. Yes. So I never like to misquote anything with stats. Yeah. So in 1986, the maternal mortality rate in the United States of America was 9.5 per 100,000 births. So that means 9.5 mothers out of 100,000 births would pass away in childbirth, which is horrific. 9.5, that sounds like way too many.
Yeah.
In
1988.
That was 1986.
Oh, in 86.
And 2018, it was 17.4. So we went from 9.5 to 17.4. Now I want to point out, in Norway in 2018, it was 1.8.
Whoa.
Okay. So let's go back to the European countries. My sister lives in Sweden. I know how that Scandinavian system works. It's all midwife driven.
Wow.
My sister's second baby was breech. They didn't even blink an eye. She had a vaginal breech birth. It's just part of their culture that they have there. And their data is great. They're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
So now we're going to jump to 2021. And in 2021, it's 32.9 per 100,000. So we went from 9.5 to 17.4 to 32.9. Now, I want to talk about the rates in Black women, because it's 3 times higher than that. So in 2021, it's 69.9 per 100,000 births for Black women in our culture, in our country.
That is so unacceptable.
It's so unacceptable. And the stats post 2020 have significantly changed, significantly changed.
For everything else? Or you mean for
birth?
Yeah.
I mean, it's gone up so much. I mean, that's such a short period of time, from 2018 to go from 17.4 to 32.9.
I know.
That's almost double.
So what do you think has changed outside of other medical interventions?
So I think that it's multifaceted and multi-layered at this point, because what happened in 2020 is everything changed. We were at a place where partners were not allowed into any prenatal appointments, not for midwives, for most midwives. But these women were entering into the hospital setting situations where they were getting care alone. So there was no asking of questions. Then we had this where everybody was masked. So there was no human contact, right? So our faces were covered, and talk about being intimidated already walking into a setting without your partner, and then having this person in a, lab coat with a mask over its face where you're basically not having any human interaction.
Yeah.
So there's that too. So anytime that you bring fear into a space, we're going to have worse results. We know that oxytocin, the love hormone that creates contractions, that creates our milk to let down, that creates the hormone of orgasm, all of these things, it doesn't work if we're living in a place of fear. It just doesn't, the hormonal cocktail doesn't blend if we have fear in place. The other thing is that there was so much fear within the hospital setting itself. So all the healthcare providers were scared of their patients. And so, there was so many things that were missed in translation. There was so many things, like these women weren't even necessarily seeing a care provider for half of their pregnancies.
Wow.
And then they walked in, if they were lucky, they got their partners in birth. Sometimes not. We heard so many. I know that Hogue for a week was threatening the possibility of that at the beginning of COVID, and I was like, "Get out of here! Like, what is this? This is the dark ages, And then so there, all of that happened, and then there is you can't as a human being say that 70% of the world population got an experimental injection and not just say like, okay, well what part does that have to do with it? And I'm not making any sort of claim. I'm saying that there needs to be data that looks at everything.
Yeah,
we need to look at everything, and we know that the data is starting to surface with so many different variations of what that means, and so. We have to take a step back and not from a triggered place, not from a place of defending one's political side or the other, not from a place of being triggered, and just say like, this is actually what happened. This is actually what happened. And so we get to actually take a step back and say like, okay, like something has changed. I can tell you prior to 2020, the things that I've seen.
Yeah, tell us all of
2020. I mean, it's too many to tell you.
Oh my God.
It's literally like, I would see like one thing a year, maybe with any sort of weird obstetrical complication. And now it's like, every month, sometimes every week, where and I'm talking like big things. I'm talking like I had a mom that was 12 weeks pregnant last month that had a brain aneurysm. I had a mom 2 months ago that had a complete placenta abruption at 27 weeks pregnant. Like,
what happens when that happens?
I mean, those are serious things. Like, thank God that everybody's fine and alive, but like they're really serious things. The rate of miscarriage that I've seen in my practice this year alone is insane. Like from April to May, there was a period of 6 weeks where I had 16 miscarriages within my practice. I'm talking from like
in 1 month,
5 weeks all the way up to 19, 20 weeks of pregnancy. And I was like, I became numb. I was like, anytime I would go to like listen for a heart tone or like look to see, I just had to constantly keep telling these parents that their babies had passed. And I didn't even want to go to work. I was like, I can't tell another parent that their baby has passed away. Like, I can't do that anymore. It's not good. And so we have to raise red flags. And I'm talking to other care providers, and I'm talking to obstetricians, and they're all saying the same thing across the board. It's across the board at this point. Everybody's saying weird things. We're seeing hemorrhage rates, and my hemorrhage rates are so low, but the bleeds that I've seen post COVID it's crazy. And so now, the amount of meds that we're carrying more for postpartum bleeds is there. Like, there's just so much that's changed within our culture in 3 years. I mean, it's going to be 4 years in March.
Yeah.
And I can't say
it's going to be 4 years.
I know. It feels like it was yesterday.
Well,
right?
Then can I ask you this? Because in your practice, I would say someone who's choosing to do a home birth with you, like, they're less likely to have gotten maybe or gotten the COVID vaccine during their pregnancy or before, right?
So we still have to say that there was also COVID. We can't say just one or the other. Like the majority of the people on this planet have contracted COVID at some
Exactly, yeah.
So we know that there are these spike proteins that are floating around in our bodies that our bodies haven't had exposure to in the past. There's great research out there right now. Dr. McCullough is saying that most of of these spike proteins are residing in women's ovaries and uteruses.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter whether you like got it or, I mean,
to be debated.
Now,
let's just say across the board that even if the majority of people that are choosing home births haven't had that, they still have had the exposure to COVID. Now, with that being said, I also want to say that we know that around 70% of the world's population did have the injection. And in America, there was people that were losing their jobs left and right. So while my clients might not have got it, the majority of their husbands had to in order to keep their jobs.
And sleeping together and all that.
They're sleeping together. So you can't say that it has to be factored in. And that's not from any place other than being purely scientific and saying we have to look at the data and see what has changed in the last almost 4 years since COVID has happened to our planet.
Okay, so lots of miscarriages happening. At what point is it a miscarriage, and at what point does it become a stillborn?
So right now in our country, like anything past 23 weeks is usually viable. Like a baby that's born alive at 23 weeks, the NICU, has the ability to save these little micro babies. Not saying that they have the best outcomes, but the 23 weeks is usually like, okay, like they're going to give it a attempt at life, 23, 24 weeks.
Wow.
A death certificate is issued post 20 weeks. Prior to 20 weeks, there's no death certificate issued. In my small little practice, prior to 2020, I had 0 stillbirths. Okay, now that just might have been luck. Post 2020, I've had 6 in my practice. I'm talking post 20 weeks pregnant. All of my stillbirths have been post 33 weeks. 6 in my practice.
And how did you find out? Like you went for a checkup, or they went into labor?
No, it's usually like decreased fetal movement, and then we do a checkup and find that there's not a heartbeat. Yeah, wow. I mean it's tragic on so many different levels. The amount of grief that everybody's experiencing, and in my tiny little community, it's crazy to navigate that, like to walk people through that. And the county of Orange, we've navigated how we can support women that choose to birth their stillborn babies at home, because if they were choosing a home birth for a live baby, they still want to have the opportunity to do that. And so that was been an interesting piece of working with Dr. Fishbein and working with the coroner and seeing what we needed to get in place for that to happen at home.
And how does that happen? Like, how can you have a natural...
Your body goes into labor and you still give birth to your baby.
So you like take Pitocin or something, or
no? So like we can use acupuncture and
wow,
yeah, like there's ways to get the body going. Sometimes women wait a week or so for their bodies to go into labor because the body does know what to do.
Yeah.
Think back to great grandma wisdom when we didn't even have ultrasound or Dopplers. We would just the baby isn't moving, and then they would wait. The midwife in the community would probably know of herbs and stuff to give them to facilitate the process along. It's kind of the same. But
how has it been for you then? I mean, just like all of this grief, how are you handling it? And also just, I mean, you didn't have any stillborns, and then now you have, and it's only 6 in 3 years. Like, how did you learn to navigate that as like an added thing to your...
It's definitely been an added thing to my plate. It's a hard question, a hard answer. I think that first and foremost, I always say that anytime that I'm stepping into any sort of birthing situation, be it with an alive baby or a baby that has passed, it's sacred, holy space. Mm-hmm. And so I always say that I allow my body to be a vessel for God's spirits, my guides, whatever you want to say, to move and work through me. This to me isn't a mechanical process where I'm going in and manipulating somebody's body. This to me is very much a very spiritual, holy, sacred practice. And so I do have a good support system in place. I do have the ability to have women like Luca and other people that can help me move trauma through myself. But it is a lot. I have to do the work. If I don't do the work, then I won't be here standing, because the amount of grief that I've seen doesn't seem like it's a normal amount for any human. But it's using breath work and using craniosacral and doing somatic body work and staying within the community of people that I trust, and making sure that first and foremost that my home is most taken care of. Like me being home and cooking my family a warm dinner is medicine to me. Like me being able to like lay on the couch and cuddle. My kids are big now, but just like cuddle them for a little bit. That's medicine to me. So it's every day is different, and every day presents something that I allow myself the ability to move through and heal, but it's across the board for all medical providers. I mean, I just recently talked to one of my doctor friends, and we were kind of like, holy shit, can you believe what's happening? And like she was on the same, like, there's so many miscarriages. I can't believe what we're seeing. And, she's like, I'm leaving my clinic. Like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I cannot do it anymore. Like, I'm going to focus more on using trauma intervention, like to help healthcare workers. But she's like, I can't be in the everyday clinic anymore. And I'm kind of starting to feel like that.
Yeah.
20 years of birth work is a long time, being on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, having the, chance of missing birthdays, Christmas, stuff like that. It's a lot. It's a lot on the soul. Most midwives, it's 50% of midwives that don't make it past the first year in practice.
Whoa.
And so, to have that longevity is really,
rare.
It's very rare, but it's something that like, I'm like, okay, like what's next for Lindsey? Like, where can I transition into a place where I'm still very much having my hand in this world, but not having to have the constant stress of being on call 24/7.
Yeah. So that makes sense. I mean, you've gotten a long, like you could have done that in a decade. And it would have been like, but you have so much knowledge and it's, I think what's so great about what you've experienced too, and staying on for as long as you have that difference between pre-2020 and post-2020, and how now these midwives that you're going to be training like are going to navigate through what they're seeing and resources for them and their patients.
I'm training my 18th student right now. So over my career I've trained 18 midwives, and my students post 2020, like I have one that was with me all throughout 2020, like throughout like lockdown and everything, and oh my gosh, it's apples and oranges compared to the training of my other midwives. They were like, here, thrown on the fire, like, welcome to midwifery. So it's been interesting for that.
How do you think, because social media, you're so you're all over social media in a good way, like sharing, and I love your videos, and it's so important because you just don't see videos like that. You don't see what birth looks like. You don't see that there's families that are part of birth, and the beauty and the relationship and the kids being part of it and the tub, like everything is so incredible. And how do you think like the positives of social media that have played into your work?
I mean, I think the ability that we have to show situations where birth is normal, like most people don't have the opportunity to ever see that. And I literally get messages almost every day that's like, I chose to have a home birth because of your account. And it's so touching because I get to actually showcase of what is possible out there. And like, I hear women like, we sit with my daughter and we watch my son, we watch these birth videos all the time. They ask to watch them before we go to bed at night. And I'm like, what a beautiful education. Like, what a beautiful remembering, because prior to 1900, everybody gave birth at home. So this wasn't something that was like so taboo. And we have it in our ancestral remembering. Like, we know that we would gather around with our aunties and our sisters, and maybe one of them was the town midwife, maybe one of them wasn't. And we would all collectively be in a space together, and we would watch whoever it was give birth. You look at elephants, they make circles around the mama elephant in labor, and they sway back and forth and move their hips until that baby elephant is born. We are mammals, and our primal brain, our primitive brain, we still give birth like mammals. And so for us to have the opportunity to see that is huge. It's so wonderful, and I'm so grateful that I have the platform. I don't know how it happened, but like right at the invention of Instagram, I started posting birth videos, and someone on the board at Instagram sent me a message and said, I see that your page is purely educational, and I'm going to take the flag off for nudity And since then, wow. I mean, there might be like warnings that there's nudity in it, but I've never had stuff pulled from my page.
That's incredible.
I don't know how it happened, but it did.
So yeah, you get to really go in and post whatever you want. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Oh my gosh, it's so meant to be too.
I know.
So who do you recommend? Do you ever recommend, I mean, there's obviously high risk pregnancies that if, you know, they feel comfortable, you know, you work with Dr. Stu and stuff, but like who shouldn't have a home birth?
Well, first and foremost, someone that has fear around it.
Yeah.
So there's fear around home birth in the terms of like, you're not going to do any research and you're going to stay in a place of fear. Clearly, it's not for someone to have home birth. But if there's fear around home birth that can be worked through and just simple questions answered, like, oh no, like if you're scared of postpartum hemorrhage, know that we have the same anti-hemorrhagic medication that the hospital carries. We have IV access. If we ever needed to go in because none of those things worked, then we would have the opportunity to go in. But usually they're just really simple answers to a question that then resolve the fear. Mm-hmm. But there is the higher risk situations where, like, you know, a mom that has like really bad heart disease or has a history of strokes, or, you know, there's definitely things that would like automatically risk a mom out of home birth. But with that being said, like our type 1 diabetics, they're supposed to be risked out of home birth too, which is why we bring in the collaborative care of an OBGYN that we are able to move through their pregnancies. So Gina's had 2 babies with me, our mutual friend. And then I've had another mom that had her 4th baby with me with type 1 diabetes. And honestly, my type 1 diabetic moms are the masters of their blood sugars. They know more and better than any person out there about their blood sugars. And so, you know, when we have the ability to work with them, with the OBs that come on and create that care that they can provide, it's amazing. Twins and breeches got written out of our licensure in 2014.
So you cannot.
But then we bring in our beloved OBs that will come in and help us with those. So we just had a set of twins that were born, I think it was December 6th. Well, I should say December 5th and 6th. So we had one baby that was born at 11:11 p.m. and came out in a hurry in a dark bathroom in the, you know, mom didn't even really know that she was pushing. The curtains were drawn. Everybody was in the kitchen talking. That baby came out.
Wow.
And then almost 11 hours later, baby B was breech and was just like, mom had no contraction. She slept all night. She nourished herself with bone broth. She had breakfast in the morning, and all of a sudden we're like, okay, let's have baby B. You know, we're getting to a place where there's a risk of an infection. There's still baby A's umbilical cord that's attached to baby B's placenta. They had their own placentas, but they were fused together. And so we had a breech baby almost 11 hours later, and that's was with Dr. Flores.
Insane.
It's insane, but it's so normal.
Yes.
You know, and to see like in a hospital setting, that just would have been an automatic C-section. And so it's like, that doesn't have to always be the case. I'm not anti-medicine. I'm not anti-hospital. I'm so grateful that those systems are in place. But there is definitely the opportunity that we can give these women to know that they have choices and they can make full autonomous decisions about their own bodies and their babies to do what's right for them and their families. And when we have the opportunity to provide that, it's one of the most empowering things that a woman can ever have.
It's so beautiful because outside of, you know, what you're sharing, like how would a woman know that she has that choice?
Yeah, I know. You have to dig for it. You have to dig for it.
And like where? Because it's like, you know, you go to the hospital because it's not in the licensure, right? So you're only going to the hospital. So you have to like, where do you look at what's possible? I mean, to think that you can wait 11 hours.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I know, it's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, social media obviously is, that's how I found you. That's what inspired me. I think, you know, I was into wellness and like, I loved the idea of it, but like you said, no one sees home births. I mean, you see like maybe one. I think I missed that day at school when they like showed, and I don't think it was a home birth. It was just a hospital birth.
No, and it's usually some like PE male teacher that's like, this is how you have babies, boys and girls. You know, like it's not actually something that's talked about in any depth where it would make a profound impact on any teenager. Yeah,
so just seeing people having birth, you know, a baby at home, it's like, mind-blowing. And it's so normal.
It's so amazing. So one of the things I'm trying to do is I would like to record to get into high school health classes.
Yeah.
Just like 15 minutes of talking about the variation of what is possible, and then maybe a little birth video.
Yes.
But the other thing I've had the opportunity to do this last year is Orange County Fire Authority. So basically all of the firefighters within our county had to do a required training, and they asked me to come in, and I did an hour-long training that's recorded, and they'll watch it every single year, and it talks about what home birth is and what supplies we bring in and why we're calling them, and what, when they do come into the setting, like what they can do to help us. And it's made a huge difference.
Wow.
The feedback I've gotten from that has been absolutely amazing. So now I'm like, okay, I need to brand that, and then bring that out into every fire department throughout the whole entire country, even though every state's going to have a little bit of a variation with our laws.
But still,
but just to have any sort of education around it would be huge.
How lucky are they that they get it from you?
I know.
And the
really
women
grateful.
that are the, receivers of that.
Yeah.
Because having someone like you who can tell them, like, this is normal, this is fine, let her. That's so great. Okay, so I know this woman, I'll have to connect you.
Yes.
Who works with she does a lot of documentaries.
Awesome.
And she works with a lot of schools, like specifically creates documentaries for schools.
Oh my
to
gosh.
see. I know, it's like the perfect situation.
That. Yeah.
She owns Indie Flicks. Her name's Sheila. She's like my husband's like aunt, like family friend.
I love that.
Yeah, so I'll connect you with her. She's great. She's done so many awesome videos. But I'm excited for you and your training. I feel like in a different world, I would have wanted to be a midwife because it just sounds.
You probably were.
Yeah,
in a different
maybe
world.
I was.
I feel like at some point our lineage, there's somewhere back in our lineage where someone in our family has been a midwife, because that's just part of what it was a common job, like we knew the herbs in our community. We knew the herbs that grew at certain times on the mountains, and we would go and harvest, and we would come back and we would make medicines, and we knew certain things that would ail a cough and that would ail a broken toe, and without the title, we were all midwives at one point. So it's it's something that's definitely within our remembering of our ancestral wisdom, of our ancestral bones that we all have.
Yeah. So maybe that's where my interest comes from. It's so beautiful, but I'm excited for you in this new chapter.
Thank you.
If anyone's interested in a training, tell us more about how they can connect with you.
I'm starting to do birth worker trainings. The best way to find me is www.theremembering.co. I just did an in-person one here in Orange County last month. It was amazing. Oh my gosh, it sold out like in an hour. I had no idea how much interest there was in it. And I'm starting to do international retreats. So I did one last year in Mexico. I have 2 coming up in 2024. We're doing Costa Rica in July, and it's not just for birth workers. So the first one we did was for birth workers, and my retreat organizer was like, Lindsey, you need to open this up to every woman. Like, this is not just birth work. Like, the ability that you have to get women deep into vulnerable places and to open their hearts is insane. And she was like, you need to open this up to all women. So I'm doing that, and it's going to be kind of like a back into the womb of yourself theme. And so that's going to be really exciting this year. And then I really hope to just be online with trainings, and that's all going to be through the website that I just mentioned.
So with your retreat, like, women find out, like, is it more like educational too? Like, it's spiritual and like kind of reconnecting and more intuitive, but also like learning about yourself.
Learning about yourself. Learning about, I call it the generational garden. Like, what was your birth like? What was your your own birth like? What was your mom's birth like? You were actually in the womb of your grandmother at one point, because your mother's eggs that were already developed in her ovaries were part of you. So, we trace back this generational garden. Like, what's your primal imprint for life? What does it mean to trust your intuition? Most people have had that completely taken out of them. So we go through different exercises with intuition, how to move through space in your nervous system, how to make sure that you regulate your nervous system, how to regulate your baby's nervous system. There's just so many things that we've lost. And so I'm really trying to bring it back in, which is why I called it the remembering. These are all tools that we've had for all of time, but now we get to bring it back to the core belief of knowing within our system.
That's beautiful. I'm so excited. And then you said online. people can...
Online, the remembering.co, and then Instagram is...
But I mean online courses.
Oh, yeah. No, I'll be teaching online courses for sure. Like, I'll do one on intuition. Like, I already have them all done. I just need to sit down and record them.
Really? Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's going to be so exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I can't wait to really tune in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
You're
for coming
so welcome.
on.
I feel like we could have talked for like
I know,
5 more hours.
Me too. I know. I'll have to have you back on. We'll talk about all the other things
I love
and like get into it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.